Hi, everyone, and welcome to Eliminating the Time-Consuming and Costly RFQ Process. My name is Alex Armstrong. I'm an expert services consultant at aPriori, and with me today is Eliza Leman, who's a product cost engineer from Keurig Dr Pepper, and also Craig Fisher, who's a product manager at aPriori. So Eliza will be co-presenting with me, and Craig will be fielding some questions from the audience. So I wanted to start today by just going over an overview of my agenda. I'll talk about an overview of this limited RFQ process that I'm describing today, talk about some of the benefits of that process, and then go through the details of how you might go about implementing it. And then Eliza will also be presenting on a case study after the fact. So I'll jump right in with a quick overview. So the traditional RFQ process can be a little bit slow. You can see that on the left here, the customer might request a quote, send that over to the supplier who would provide an initial quote. But at that point, the customer might adjust the specification, which needs to be sent back for a requote on the new specification, eventually a negotiation on pricing, and then a finalization of the quote. And depending on how much back and forth there is, it could take between 2 and 8 weeks. And so what I'd like to talk about today is a no quotation process that can eliminate a lot of that time and money. So basically, by using upfront digital factory negotiation, you can eliminate a lot of the back and forth that's required there so that the customer can quote a design themselves using aPriori, send that over to a supplier to simply review quickly and approve the quote, which can reduce the time down to 1 to 5 days and save a lot of that time and money. So that's the overall idea. And we can talk about some of the benefits of this on both sides of the relationship. For customers, you can maintain predictable pricing because you'll have access to those quotes yourselves without having to necessarily have a long conversation to get that from the supplier. And you're also gaining visibility into cost drivers because of that upfront negotiation on the digital factory. You are getting visibility into what's driving the cost, what are the reasons behind it, and what knobs can be turned. And finally, you're eliminating negotiation time, which obviously saves. On the supplier side, you can guarantee margin, since that will be one of the things that is sort of negotiated up front along with the digital factory. And you're also establishing a long-term relationship with your customer. Once this relationship is set up, it provides a lot of benefits on both sides, and it's in both sides' best interest to continue that relationship. And finally, you can also achieve a 100% hit rate on these RFQs and quotes because the customer has sort of already quoted it themselves, and it's only coming to you if they're okay with what's coming out and are prepared to move forward. So with all of that said, I can talk a little bit about how to actually establish that relationship. And this will start with an introduction where you sort of make sure everybody is on board with this type of relationship. That will require going through maybe a presentation a little bit like this to explain the concept, and then making sure that both parties are bought in, resolve any concerns people have, and once everyone is agreed, you can move forward with data gathering to model the manufacturing processes you'll be using, a financial agreement to deal with some of the financial terms, a testing process to make sure that everyone is still in agreement on what's been created, and finally, you can launch your process and start seeing those savings. So we'll go through each of these steps in a little bit more detail. For data gathering, there's a couple of components to this, but we'll start with machine data gathering. Here, you're looking to gather things like accounting data, like labor rates and overhead rates, process parameters like setup times and injection rates. In this example, injection molding we're looking at, and machine limits like clamping forces or just dimensions of the machines. And that all gets gathered and then put into aPriori, which you can see on the right there, to store that data and model behavior. And similarly, we'll also gather material data, things like material costs and also physical material properties, things like melting temperature, injection pressure, things like that. Again, the example here being injection molding, but the same applies to most processes. And then finally, there's the financial agreement. So some of this is similar to machine and material data in the sense that we're just gathering some accounting data like overhead rates and packaging costs. But there's also some other more interesting items like margin and potentially lead time. Margin, you might not come to an agreement on a flat rate that gets stored in the VB. You might have some more complicated calculation, or even no data or value stored at all, and just an agreement about what type of discussion might take place to determine margin. The same goes for lead time. That might not be something that you're calculating with aPriori, but given that that's part of the standard quoting process, that's something you'll also need to think about as you're developing this agreement ahead of time. So once all of that data has been gathered, you'll have a functional digital factory that can model your manufacturing processes, and you want to test that out to make sure that it's still meeting everyone's expectations. And so the first step here is to gather a sample of parts that are representative of your full population of parts that you might want to be quoting with this process. So generally 20 to 40 parts per type is about right. And you'll want those parts to represent the variety of processes, materials, sizes, and complexities of parts that you're trying to model, so that you're not looking at a really small subset of the parts that you're going to end up using this model for. And if you have two really disparate types of parts, maybe you're looking at machining parts and also injection molded parts, you might end up having 30 of each type of part since they're so disparate. Next, at that point, you'll have the parts that you need, and you can run them through aPriori, create some example test quotes, and then update the model based on feedback either the customers or the suppliers have. This is where a lot of the negotiation on the digital factory will take place. And then during that process, you'll also need to come to a reporting agreement, because the party with aPriori, generally maybe the customer, will want to be sharing the data that's coming out of aPriori with the supplier, and they'll need to come to an agreement on what type of data will be reported and what format it will be reported in, so that everybody has the information they need to make a good decision. So once you've gone through that process, which is probably going to be iterative and take a number of steps, a number of cycles, you'll want to eventually draw a line in the sand and say, okay, this model's good, it's working for us, let's move forward taking advantage. And that's something that won't be a final agreement. We'll want to come back and revisit that, and I'll touch on that in just a second. So once you finish that process, you're ready to launch. And this is generally what that limited quotation relationship would look like in practice. The customer would cost the part that they're interested in aPriori, see the results, make sure they're what's expected, and then generate a price report that they would then send over as part of the purchase order to the supplier, who would then just review what's in the RFQ or the purchase order and move forward at that point. Although obviously periodically you want to come back and review the agreement that's been made and make sure that things that have changed in the business landscape are still represented. And this might happen, could be every 3 months, every 6 months, every year. You want to set some kind of schedule for coming back to make sure that this model is still appropriate for everyone. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eliza Leman, who has a case study how this has been deployed at Keurig Dr Pepper.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Eliza Leman. I'm one of our lead cost engineers over at Keurig Dr Pepper. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about not a zero RFQ process in the true sense, but how we've been able to achieve a pretty limited RFQ process within our company. And to do that, first, I'm going to walk you guys through just sort of the background of how we operate as KDP and our ties with aPriori. Then I'll go into sort of our limited RFQ process, review some of the requirements, I would say, that are necessary for achieving this limited RFQ, and then the benefits to suppliers that sign up for it. So first of all, a little background just about necessarily what does Keurig Dr Pepper maybe need aPriori for. So we are producers of the brewer appliances for the coffee side of our business. And with that, we actually do not manufacture the brewers ourselves. We do outsource them to contract manufacturers, or CMs, as you'll see them sometimes referred to in this presentation. And so from there, when we're developing new products, we generally have three main things that we're trying to achieve throughout that process, which is predictability, agility, and speed. And to start with at least predictability, our biggest goal is to pretty much prior to engagement of our contract manufacturers and getting quotes from them, we are striving to achieve internal modeling with cost accuracy with a confidence of, say, roughly plus or minus 5%, as a way to help speed up decision-making throughout our new product development process. And with that comes agility and being able to pretty much, with that internal modeling that comprises of different cost models that we have an internal model for, as well as the support of using aPriori, of course, but basically being able to very quickly, and again, without taking the time to request quotes from our contract manufacturers, say, here's option A for a design, here's option B. Which one is maybe cheaper? Which one is going to be the best decision for the business? And presenting that to leadership and saying, here you go, pick A or B. And then after selecting whichever design, bringing that to a contract manufacturer at that point in time. Obviously, these two would result in moving faster. And due to that, it's from reduced negotiations, it's from knowledge reuse. And the only way that we're able to achieve this sort of swift decision-making and avoiding that sort of snake that Alex had in one of his previous slides of here's your design, bring it to the supplier, have the supplier look at it, quote you several days, get back to you, you review the quote, et cetera, which can take, for one part, even like 2 to 8 weeks. Like for us, we want to be able to make decisions like that in a matter of days. The only way we can do that is making sure that the modeling that we are doing is as accurate as possible, because we don't want to be making decisions based on modeling that is potentially several dollars or tens of dollars off of what we would expect. So with that, kind of brings us to our relationship with aPriori. We implemented aPriori into our work stream in 2018, so we've been using it for about 2 years now, where at that point in time, we did have cost transparency to quite a bit of, and fact-based information to quite a bit of our parts in our brewers, where the only thing that we couldn't necessarily go back to a supplier or our contract manufacturers and say with data was our injection molded parts. So in case you're not aware, like when you're looking at our brewers, you'll see that pretty much the outside of it is plastic, our outside housing. You'll see the drip trays, the plastic cold water tanks. So we have a lot of plastic that varies generally from program to program because we want to be differentiating between programs. So there's a lot of times not consistency as we move throughout across new product development. And so with that, we were constantly seeing variables in the cost drivers such as cycle time, machine tonnage, cavitation for our injection molded parts. And prior to aPriori, if we had questions on, say, what we thought was the correct, say, cycle time for a cold water tank, the best we were able to do was go to our contract manufacturer, basically say, hey, you guys are quoting us 60 seconds. We think it should be 30. Basically, let's have a discussion in that form. Obviously, if we're going to them in that way, there's very little for us to stand on except for, I think it should be this, and I think that your estimation is wrong. When we implemented aPriori, this provided us a tool to then look at each of those cost drivers and say to our contract manufacturers, hey, number one, we have this new software. We walked them through it. We showed them the capabilities of this tool and said to them, like, we're finding after running this part through this tool that the cycle time is not quite what you guys have quoted us. Can you tell us why there's that gap? Can you explain to us maybe are our assumptions wrong? Do we need to make adjustments, et cetera? So it became then a fact-based negotiation rather than just tribal knowledge, which was very important for us to kind of close that or really make that black box of sort of how they were coming to their assumptions much more clear. Now, after having done this with several different brewer programs, previous programs, we've done a ton of analysis across all of our contract manufacturers, and we're at a point of maturity where we are seeing consistent patterns in specific types of parts and like specific maybe gaps in, say, cycle time, that we now know the reasons for those gaps. And since it's become so consistent, we are now aligned to basically use, instead of the out-of-the-box aPriori digital factories, implement digital factories based on our specific contract manufacturers. So that way we're now able to, instead of saying, oh, I know this part's always 10 seconds more for the cycle time, we want to be able to eliminate that variability between the two. So that way I can run parts and basically say, hey, I know that if I run this at contract manufacturer A, this should be maybe not 100% perfect, but pretty darn close, to a point where we feel confident enough that that's an estimate that we can make pretty big design decisions upon. So with that, to give a little background around sort of what information we already had and the information that we usually get in a quote from a contract manufacturer is, prior to even the idea of migrating to these digital factories with our contract manufacturers, we've already achieved the transparency of them providing us their labor rates, their machine rates, their resin pricing, their overhead structures, and we knew how much SG&A and profit they were receiving on each program, which was definitely not something that happened overnight. It was something that was built up, and sort of what we knew is that we already are basically now also 80% of the way there for implementing a digital factory. We now really only need to understand how basically their injection molding machines work. And once we were able to achieve that sort of information, we could then close out the unknowns of the variables that occur in each program for those specific parts, which are cycle times, machine tonnage, the part weights, the cavitation, tooling costs, etc. With all of that information now in those digital factories, modeling out that specific contract manufacturer. So this kind of leads me to describe really how are we working to get now this limited RFQ? So as Alex already described, as I've already mentioned, we've all seen the regular sort of like back and forth that it always takes when you're looking for a supplier, you're getting a quote on a new product, and it's very time consuming. And now, and to be quite frank, we used to be doing exactly that, where previously our team was basically we were presenting a BOM to multiple contract manufacturers, requesting quotes from them, from each of them for like over 100 parts or so, taking them back, reviewing them, going back to each individual one, and having separate negotiations. It was very time consuming and slowed down our process so much, where we would be focusing on little tiny parts looking at, okay, like, is this cycle time, does this make sense? Does each individual item, like, verifying that it all made sense? It wasn't working. So now what we've done is started modeling internally prior to any sort of CM communication, where in that internal modeling, we're building out a cost model that is comprised of all that data that I showed you on the previous slide, their resin pricing, their labor rates, machine rates, etc. We would have gathered quotes probably from outside suppliers for parts that we might control because it's critical to quality. We want to have our hands on who those suppliers are, negotiate it ourselves, etc. And then, of course, all of the data from the digital factory from aPriori for all of the newly designed plastic parts. So like all of those cycle times, machine tonnage, all of that. And then estimates on where we think this program would land in terms of commercial negotiations for those SG&A and profit that just program to program we would be negotiating. So then we have the negotiations on just those two aspects really per product. We no longer are RFQing prior to award to a contract manufacturer. We now go to the CM of our choice, maybe a few, but generally we know strategy-wise who we'd like to approach. We approach them and say, look, we have a brewer. It's going to be like this maybe previous model, maybe with features XYZ added to it with a rough volume of however many per year. This is where we would like to see us land commercially for you guys. There is still some time and some negotiation around that. Obviously, most people when discussing profit don't necessarily want to take the first offer, but that's now by just focusing on those high level items, which are really, quite frankly, the whole purpose of doing a program or signing up to manufacture something for someone is how much are you going to make on it for the supplier at least. And so we're now skipping the part of going into the nitty gritty and going part by part prior to awarding a program and just negotiating on those commercial terms because we are so confident in our specific, in our internal modeling that we know that once we do have them quote it, it shouldn't be a surprise. So then that's when we come to now the award and RFQ after the fact, where basically once we've all aligned, we will then award that contract manufacturer the business. And then that is when we provide them the BOM for them to then cost out, provide back to us because there still is enough that we need to review. It's not just one part. So it is more complex than just saying, oh yeah, like everyone will agree to everything. It is very nuanced, but for the most part, it is now significantly reduced where we RFQ this brewer out to them. They get it back to us within a matter of a week or so. We review in a day, and it's pretty much like as long as there's nothing glaring, we would give the check mark to move forward. And so in comparison, it's saving a lot of time. And the whole really point is that previously we already knew like sort of what the cost that we were already coming up with. We're confident in that, obviously. But the reason we're able to do this moving forward is will be a lot because of the digital factory, because now that's what the biggest variable and unknown was on our part. But once we're able to model out with the assumptions that we know our CM is literally using on their manufacturing floor, that it creates that level of the level of uncertainty goes away essentially. So we become much more confident and allows us to save a lot of time. So how do you really get to this. And again, I know Alex kind of spoke on this a little bit as well, but I wanted to discuss it on just from my experience, where I think there's really 4 things that are really key in order to achieve the level of transparency that my team and my company has achieved with our manufacturers. And number 1, it's got to be buy-in. And obviously it needs to be buy-in from that supplier or contract manufacturer, but you also need buy-in from your internal team, and make sure that everyone is aligned to supporting you in this endeavor, because it takes a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of time. It's a lot of effort, and it's opening the books not only on asking for them, but also sharing maybe what your team is doing and how you're coming up with your costs. So it's a two-way street, which leads me into the transparency portion, where, like I said, you're potentially going to be asking them to provide data that's very detailed, probably a little sensitive, and probably not data that they're sharing with anyone else, because unless they're specifically asking for it, it's a very rare thing to literally go in and provide to someone the makeup of their injection molding machine and what the specifications are and all of that, just to give someone a quote one time. You know, like, it's a level of it's a different level than probably what you've requested before. So it's a lot for the supplier or contract manufacturer, but then in return, you need to be transparent as well of how you're like what you're doing with that data. And so what I've done throughout my process in this is basically be as open and honest as possible. I've tried to find and provided them Excel sheets where I even had their data do the calculation that I know it's going to roll up to in aPriori, so that way they can see real time as they're filling in this information, what the output is that I'm going to be taking and putting into my aPriori digital factory. I've answered, like, they're asking specifics. It's like, okay, well, so what's going to happen here? And it's just sharing and really opening up and saying, look, like, we're like, let's just be honest with each other. It'll make everything better, and it'll also help ease their uncertainty if you're telling them, like, look, I just want this so we can be predictive, so we can move faster, and because we're so aligned already with what you're providing us. It'll just help everyone, which then really leads me into the communication portion of, again, like, being open and honest, having that two-way dialogue, so that way everyone understands really what the ultimate goal of this is and what the value is that can be perceived. And then lastly, and this is probably the most important one, is having patience, because this is going to take a while. Like I said, you're asking potentially for data, especially with the digital factory, that they've probably never shared with a customer before. And it takes a long time to build that trust up between both parties. And so I can share from my experience, it took us a while to get, like, where we had already gotten so much cost transparency from our contract manufacturers, that last little bit of really just getting our injection molding machine information took quite a while. But it's communicating, it's being transparent, it's getting their buy-in, that eventually, if you're able to achieve all of that, it will pay off in the end. And then lastly, went too far. Lastly, just what are really the benefits? Obviously, for the customer, the benefits are very clear, but what are the benefits for the suppliers that do say, okay, like, maybe I'm open to doing this with some of my partners? And so number one, it's going to be reduced time to market. Like I said, and I'm hammering this point in, but I really can't stress enough, like, how much, like, this really does save time. If you're able to be predictive and accurate in your costing prior to engagement of a supplier or a contract manufacturer, it will significantly reduce the amount of time it takes for you to get a product to market. Number two, it potentially opens up areas for leverage across the network. So we're able to, now that we're able to see outside of even the digital factory information, we have our own databases where we collect data that we don't necessarily have in aPriori, but we're able to identify like, oh, you're purchasing this tubing. Maybe like I see that that's at a lower volume because it's for this specific program, but we know that this supplier is actually using the same tubing. Why don't we basically bring this together and use the economies of scale and identify an opportunity for basically a cost down that then that contract manufacturer or supplier or whoever can utilize across other customers as well. So that's a great, obviously, benefit. And then the last one, and the most important one, is establishing those partnerships and loyalty. I can say with confidence that with the contract manufacturers that we have achieved this level of transparency and detail with, it really hinders us from going to outside CMs, like when we're looking to produce a new brewer, where I know that, say, if you're a supplier or you're looking for someone to supply maybe one part for you, you might get 1, 2, 5, 10 different quotes. This then really takes away the need to go and quote out to other suppliers when you're looking for bit or when you need someone, because you will have already established that trust. You know how they're building up their costs. You know sort of maybe what their ins and outs are, and it makes the decision way easier than maybe trying to go and just get some black box number from someone else. So I would say like that's probably the biggest thing. And I know, again, that we've definitely established very strong partnerships with our contract manufacturers because of their willingness to open up and share this with us. So with that, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. And I know Alex and I are open to answering any questions that may have come in for either of us.
All right, great. So we'll start with the first question here, which is, how do you mitigate the risk if one supplier were to close?
That's fair. I think the way, I don't know if, like, Alex, if you have anything after this, but for us at least, like, it's basically looking across the network and making sure that you have enough suppliers in your network to pretty much mitigate that if one were to close, that you're able to at least have enough capacity at separate suppliers to move over. And again, like worst case, if you did have to move it also to someone that isn't in your little trust circle that you've now created, in order to keep business running, I'm sure that that's a decision that would be made as well.
Yeah, ideally you could have this relationship with multiple suppliers, but that's a case by case basis. It'll depend.
A similar question was raised, which is a two-part question. Are you finding that fewer suppliers are winning most of the work? And then the second part of this question is, do you get prices increased after the fact with suppliers using the agreed facts against you?
That's a good question. So I guess the first one, are the suppliers that we choose winning most of the work? I would say, like, yes, like we really, at least I'll say we have like a small handful of contract manufacturers, and we really don't bid out programs outside of that handful. So yes, like pretty much this is our now network of trusted people, and we don't really look outside of that unless we need to in order to expand capacity, which we do on a step function, not just like all of a sudden. And then the second part of the question, could you actually repeat it, Craig? I now forgot what it was.
Sure. The second part was, do you get prices increased after the fact with the suppliers who may be using the agreed facts against you?
That's also a fair question. We haven't had that to be a huge issue. I will say that, like, yes, we agree on specific pricing, and then we have a review every, like, twice a year, where at least for, like, say, resin pricing, the labor rates, et cetera, like commodity items, we will review and update based on market trends and all of that. So we do see fluctuation. Like, we don't necessarily, like for a polypropylene resin, right? Like, we don't hold it at that same price that we agreed on maybe 4 years ago. That's not fair to either party. But I wouldn't say that all of a sudden we agree on a profit and, like, for a program, we award it and then they're like, oh, we actually need X profit, because they know that, like, the reason of awarding them and with all the other stuff that, like, it wouldn't be in their best interest to do that, because they know as long as they aren't the only person that you're doing this with, they know that we have other contract manufacturers and relationships that we could potentially move products to. So not necessarily in their best interest to do that.
Great. Another question here, I think, Eliza, you did speak to this, but the question is, how long did it take to get all your tier 2 supplier quote data?
Yeah, so it took a while. I'll say that the level of fidelity that we got prior to signing aPriori on probably took about a year or so, because we have a separate model that we utilize that basically houses all of that data. And then I would say that gathering the kind of last chunk of it, that like getting the machine specifications and the specifics around that, took at least another really 6 months in time, I would say. So it's a while, and I would even preface that as we didn't just bring on these contract manufacturers and all of a sudden request that data right away. We already did have established partnerships with them. And then it was a, hey guys, in order to, like, even further our partnership, let's start to share some of this information. So it's a commitment, but in the end, it is very worthwhile, I think, for both parties.
The only thing I'd add there is it does depend a little bit on sort of the open-mindedness and forthcomingness of the supplier.
Yeah.
Agreed. I don't know if you would say they're super forthcoming and ready with all that data, or if it took a little time to sort of get them invested. But I think we've seen in some of our other customers, there have been examples of gathering that data much more quickly. But it does depend on the specific parties that are involved there. Everyone, it's not like it takes 6 months of dedicated effort of having someone working on this. But it could potentially take that long.
That's a fair point, Alex. Yeah, sorry. That's a fair point. I will preface that, they weren't collecting data for 6 months. It was them dragging their feet for 6 months. And then on top of that, we are also unique where I feel like a lot of the zero RFQ is for just like a single part, and like a supplier of a single part, where we're asking for data on like a full brewer. So it's definitely more complex and adds to that amount of time. So I would imagine, like Alex said, it would be a lot faster with something maybe not quite like this.
Mm-hmm. Another question that came in is, do you implement this for existing parts as well as new parts?
Yes, we have this for existing as well. It's, for us, it's not quite as, we don't put quite as much pressure on existing parts, just because there would have been other agreements made, and we do want to respect that, and we don't necessarily want to go after people if, say, we find something that maybe made it cheaper. We don't want to completely upend that, but we do have it for both situations.
Mm-hmm. And another question I think that came in is, how often do you update cost in the virtual factory? So things, the examples cited were labor, energy, machine costs as depreciation is changing.
Yeah, my team does a semi-annual business review, so twice a year is how often we would probably be updating that information. I don't know about the specifics because we haven't really had it implemented long enough to really need to update the other information. But like labor, at least in resins, like the commodities, we definitely would do every 6 months to maintain accuracy.
Another question that just came in is, are you using aPriori to estimate the tooling cost, or how is the tooling cost incorporated into the supplier selection process?
That is a great question. We are using aPriori to estimate the tooling costs. That's definitely like a big portion of cost for us because we generally have like 40 tools that need to be made, of 40 unique tools per program. So it gets very expensive. We are using it to estimate. That's kind of part 2, at least, of our digital factory implementation, where at least for my next step, I want to dig into all of the aspects around just tooling for each of our contract manufacturers. And I will say that kind of where we are right now with that is because it's definitely a factor when we are selecting a CM. But what we've been able to at least identify with the CMs that we're working with currently is we know what gaps aPriori has from each specific CM. And that's kind of what I discussed earlier of like, we see consistencies throughout each program that we run. So we're able to kind of decipher between that as well as just other knowledge that we have from them. But yeah, it's definitely something in a big portion and help for what we've been using it for.
Another question is, have you reduced your year-over-year cost reduction goals after this change, with the assumption that you had these type of goals?
Yeah, we have. We definitely have general year-over-year goals with our contract manufacturers, and I wouldn't necessarily say that this is getting us into the goals, because what we want to do is we have goals basically to help drive out costs in the program year over year for our sustaining products. For new products, this has, what I would say, helped us meet cost targets for our programs and be able to meet those targets earlier on, is how I would probably phrase it.
Great, and I think we have time for one last question, so I'll read that right now. So the question is, did you reduce the number of buyers or engineers at the supplier or your company?
No, I wouldn't say that we, at least from the implementation of this, that didn't have a factor on the number of buyers or suppliers at either situation. Honestly, it may have probably helped increase because we want to make sure we have enough people on all fronts to help support.
Perfect. All right, well, I think that brings us to the conclusion of this. So thanks everyone for joining today.